She asked for divorce again that morning. Her tone was flat, practiced, like someone reading a grocery list. I remember how the sunlight fell across the kitchen tiles, how the coffee between us had gone cold. Last time she said those words, I dropped to my knees, begged her to stay, and promised to change. But this time, I didn't beg. I just looked at her, really looked, and saw a stranger wearing my wife's face. Her voice cracked slightly when I didn't react. Maybe she expected tears, maybe rage. Instead, I smiled. Something in her eyes flickered, confusion, maybe fear. She thought I'd lost my mind. But I hadn't. I'd simply found it. She didn't know that moment would be the last time she'd ever have the upper hand. Because one line, one sentence broke her. We weren't always like this. There was a time when I thought she was my universe, and maybe she was. Back then, our apartment was small but full of noise. The good kind. The kind that comes from laughter over burnt toast and the hum of late-night movies played just to have something in the background while we talked. She'd curl up beside me on the couch, her head against my chest, tracing patterns on my shirt while whispering dreams neither of us could afford yet. We had plans, a house, kids, travel. All the clichés that still somehow felt like ours. I remember one winter night, the power went out. We huddled together under a blanket, candles flickering, the world outside frozen in silence. She'd laughed when I tried to warm her hands with mine, saying, "You always make me feel safe." And I'd smiled, replying softly, "That's all I ever wanted." It's strange how those words still echo sometimes, even now. I gave up a lot for her, not that she ever asked directly. It was in the way she sighed when I mentioned the promotion in another city, or how she'd go quiet whenever my friends invited me out. I told myself love meant sacrifice, and so I stayed. I stopped seeing people who made her uncomfortable, stopped chasing opportunities that took me too far. At first, it felt right. Noble, even. Like devotion was its own reward. But slowly, without realizing it, I built my world around her, and she built hers somewhere else. Our mornings used to be soft and unhurried. She'd wake before me, humming while making coffee. Sometimes, I'd catch her looking at me with that quiet smile, the one that said this was exactly where she wanted to be. But over time, the humming stopped. The smiles became shorter, distracted. She started looking at her phone more, always with that half-hidden expression, the kind people wear when they're part of a conversation you'll never be invited to. I noticed, of course. But I didn't question it. Love, I told myself, means trust. And so I trusted. Blindly. When I'd talk about our future, vacations, maybe a move to the suburbs, she'd sigh. Not the dreamy kind, but the heavy, distant one. The kind that sounds like goodbye in slow motion. Once, I asked her what was wrong. She smiled, that polite, practiced smile, and said, "Nothing, you just worry too much." I wanted to believe her, so I did. Looking back now, I realize love can be like fog, it softens everything, hides the cliffs just long enough for you to step off the edge. At the time, I thought we were just growing apart, like all couples do. I thought she was tired, that maybe I wasn't doing enough. So I tried harder, cooking her favorite meals, leaving notes, and small surprises. I kept telling her I loved her, hoping she'd say it back with the same warmth she used to. But her words began to sound hollow, rehearsed, even. "Love you too," she'd say, her eyes already back on the screen. I ignored the ache that came after. Because it's easier to keep believing than to admit the truth, that the person you'd bleed for has already started living a life where you don't exist. It started small. They always say that distance never arrives like a storm. It seeps in quietly, like water under a locked door. At first, I thought it was work. She had just gotten a promotion, a big one. More meetings, late calls, the occasional overnight project. I was proud of her. I told her so every night. She'd smile distractedly, scrolling through her phone while I spoke, and say, "Thanks, babe. I'm just exhausted lately." I didn't notice how often "lately" became the excuse for everything. Her new routine didn't bother me at first. I cooked dinner, waited for her, sometimes fell asleep on the couch to the sound of the TV murmuring softly. She'd come home past midnight, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, a sharper, floral scent I couldn't place. Once, I asked if she'd switched brands. She laughed. "Oh, must be from one of the girls at work." It made sense. It always did, until it didn't. The first girls' night happened a few weeks later. She wore that black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she said was too special to wear out. "Since when do you wear that for the girls?" I teased, half joking. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "You worry too much. It's just dinner." Dinner ended at 2 in the morning. She slipped into bed without a word, smelling faintly of wine and something else, something unfamiliar and expensive. I wanted to ask where she'd been, what took so long, but I didn't. I just lay there, pretending to be asleep, feeling her back turned to me. The next morning, I made her coffee like always. She sipped it absent-mindedly, scrolling through her messages. "Long night?" I asked carefully. She didn't even look up. "Yeah, we just talked for hours. You know how girls are." I nodded, smiled, and pretended I did. That became our rhythm, her life happening elsewhere, mine orbiting quietly around it. My friends started noticing before I did. At a barbecue one weekend, my friend Daniel pulled me aside. "She's been distant, man. You okay?" "Yeah," I lied easily. "She's just stressed. Work's been crazy." He gave me that look, the kind you can't return. The pitying one. I hated it. Because admitting something was wrong would mean acknowledging the cracks I'd been ignoring. And I wasn't ready for that. One evening, I came home early. Her car was in the driveway, but the lights were off. Inside, the house felt wrong. The air was heavy, too still. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a message before I could stop myself from reading the preview. "Can't stop thinking about last night." I froze. The message disappeared before I saw the name. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone, but I didn't unlock it. I couldn't. Because doing that would mean the truth was real. And I wasn't ready for reality. She walked in seconds later, holding groceries, smiling like nothing had changed. "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting the bags down. My voice sounded strange when I spoke. "Who texted you?" She blinked. "What? Your phone just went off." "Oh. Just work stuff." She said it so casually, so effortlessly, that I almost believed her. Almost. A week later, the fights began, small at first, over nothing. I'd ask harmless questions that suddenly made her defensive. "Why are you home so late?" "I told you, I was catching up with friends." "Again? You're paranoid again, you know that." That word, again, it stung more than anything. Like my concern was some recurring illness she had to tolerate. Then came the guilt. "You're smothering me," she said one night, tears in her eyes. "You don't trust me anymore." "I do," I insisted. "I just miss you." She shook her head. "Then stop acting like my warden." I remember apologizing to her. Apologizing, for noticing her absence. My mind became a battlefield. Half of me screamed that something was wrong, the other half whispered that I was overreacting. I'd pick up her phone sometimes when she wasn't around, my thumb hovering over the screen. But I never went through with it. I'd put it back down, convincing myself love shouldn't need proof. One night, after another girls' night, she came home late. Her lipstick was smudged, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. She dropped her purse, kicked off her heels, and looked at me, as if surprised I was still awake. "You're still up," she said. "I couldn't sleep." "Don't start," she sighed, walking past me. "I'm too tired for this." I didn't say anything. "Yeah, but you're thinking about it." That was the thing about her lately, she'd argue with what she imagined I was thinking, not what I said. It was easier for her that way. The first time she mentioned divorce, it was during one of those quiet mornings. I was half asleep, sipping coffee, when she said it. "I don't think this is working anymore." Just like that. No anger, no tears, just exhaustion. I froze. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "We've been stuck, haven't we? Maybe we're just done." Her words hit me like a slow punch to the chest. Done. "We can fix this," I said quickly. "We always fix things." She looked at me with a kind of pity I'll never forget. "You can't fix something that's already gone." I begged her then. Like before. Told her we could try counseling, a trip, anything. She hesitated, watching me fall apart in front of her. Then, after what felt like forever, she said softly, "Fine. Let's try again." And just like that, she stayed. But something inside me cracked that day, not enough to break, but enough to never heal right. For a while after, I convinced myself that was our low point, that things would get better now. She was home more, affectionate even. We laughed again, cooked together. She'd kiss my cheek when she passed me in the kitchen. But there was something hollow behind it all, like an actor remembering lines from an old script. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. At night, when she thought I was asleep, she'd lie awake, scrolling through her phone, that same ghostly glow lighting her face. Sometimes, she'd sigh quietly, the sound of someone trapped in a life they'd already left. I'd turn over and pretend not to notice. Because the truth was unbearable, and denial was easier to live with. Looking back, that was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. She had already started pulling away, not physically, but emotionally. Every touch, every word felt rehearsed. And I kept trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. Love had turned into a habit. And I was still clinging to a ghost that wore my wife's smile. The truth didn't come crashing down all at once. It arrived in fragments, quiet, devastating pieces that fit together only when it was too late to look away. It started with her laptop. She had left it open on the dining table one morning before work, half-packed bag beside it, coffee cup still warm. I wasn't snooping, I was cleaning, the way I always did after she rushed out. But when I closed the lid, the screen flickered awake. And there it was, an email. The subject line was ordinary enough, "Missed our talk last night." But the words inside weren't ordinary at all. "You sounded tired yesterday. I hope he didn't keep you up. I miss your voice when it's just us." My first instinct wasn't anger, it was confusion. My mind twisted itself into denial so fast it almost hurt. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was reading it wrong. But then I saw the name. Ethan. I'd heard it before, her work friend. The one she mentioned casually, the one who gets her humor. I stood there, my hands trembling slightly on the table. I scrolled up, knowing I shouldn't. Each message was a cut, a collection of moments where she had shared her thoughts, her frustrations, her secrets. The same ones she used to tell me. They weren't overtly romantic, no confessions, no grand declarations, but the intimacy was undeniable. The way she said things like, "You always understand me," or "I can't talk to him about this, he doesn't get it." That line broke something in me. Because him was me. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. Instead, I spent the next few days walking through our life like a ghost, pretending everything was fine. She laughed, she smiled, she kissed my cheek before work. But now, every touch felt staged. Every word, rehearsed. At night, I'd lie awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, replaying those messages in my head. I'd wonder what they talked about when she smiled at her phone. If she thought about him when she sighed against my shoulder. If every "I love you" that left her lips was already borrowed from someone else's name. Sleep became a stranger. Food turned tasteless. My world shrank to the sound of her laughter in another room, laughter that wasn't meant for me anymore. I started seeing patterns I had ignored. Her tone changed when she spoke his name. The way she defended him during casual conversations. How her phone was always face down now, her notifications always silent. Still, I made excuses. Still, I clung to the memory of who she used to be. Then came the message that ended everything. It wasn't meant for me. One evening, she was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it, not intentionally, just instinctively, and saw his name flash across the screen. I hate how he still thinks he can fix this. The air left my lungs. I remember staring at those words until they blurred. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. It told me everything. All the pleading, the apologies, the desperate promises, she had gone back to him afterward, vented about me. The man was trying to save what was already buried. When she came out, wrapped in her towel, humming softly, I looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. "Who's Ethan?" I asked quietly. She froze for just a second, just long enough for me to see the truth flicker in her eyes before the mask slid back on. She laughed, too quickly. "He's a friend. You know that." I nodded. "A friend who misses your voice." Her expression hardened. "You went through my stuff." I didn't answer. She shook her head, disgusted. "God, you're unbelievable. You twist everything. Do you even hear yourself?" And there it was, the shift. The gaslight. The guilt. I was no longer the one betrayed, I was the paranoid husband, the insecure man who didn't trust her. She made me question my own sanity. I started apologizing, again. For reading, for asking, for noticing. She accepted the apology without a word. Just silence, cold, calculated silence. Weeks passed in that quiet tension. I still couldn't let go. I thought if I showed her more love, more patience, she'd come back to me. But love given to someone who's already gone becomes self-destruction. I started losing weight. My friends said I looked tired. My coworkers asked if I was okay. I wasn't. I was unraveling slowly, thread by thread, smiling through the pain so no one would see the truth. At night, I'd stand by our bedroom door, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, untouched by the storm that was consuming me. I wanted to hate her. But I couldn't. I still loved her, the version of her that existed before Ethan, before the lies. That was the cruelest part, realizing that the person who hurt me most was still the one I wanted to hold. The breaking point came one quiet Sunday morning. She sat across from me at the table, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I wanted to talk, about us, about what was left. Instead, she sighed and said, almost absent-mindedly, "I think we should just end this." No preamble. No emotion. Just a statement. I stared at her. "You mean, divorce?" She nodded, still looking at her screen. "Yeah. We've been dragging this out. It's exhausting." Her tone wasn't angry. It was boring. That hurt more than any shouting ever could. "Is it because of him?" I asked quietly. That got her attention. She looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" "You know what I'm talking about." For a moment, her mask slipped. Then she scoffed. "You're obsessed. There's no one else, okay? You're just making this worse." I almost believed her, again. Almost. But something in me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet snap somewhere deep inside where love used to live. I realized in that instant that I wasn't losing her. I had already lost her long ago. And suddenly, I felt nothing. No anger. No pleading. No panic. Just an eerie calm. She was still talking, listing reasons, blaming me, rewriting our history to justify her exit. I wasn't even listening. Because I finally understood, she wasn't the love of my life anymore. She was the lesson. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. When she looked at me the next morning, expecting tears or arguments, I smiled instead. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, just a flicker, but it was there. She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything shifted. Because the man who used to beg her to stay was gone. And the one sitting across from her now, calm, quiet, and unshakable, had nothing left to lose. I stopped arguing. I stopped begging. I stopped trying to explain myself to someone who had already decided the verdict. For weeks after that morning, I let her have the stage. I played the part she expected, hollow apologies, quiet retreats, the man who'd been broken by love and finally accepted it. I wore the grief like a costume. She believed it. She relaxed. She underestimated me. That would be her mistake. The first change was small and almost mechanical. I began to write everything down. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Not at first. Because memory gets soft. Emotions blur. If there was going to be any truth left when I needed it, it had to be preserved in ink and time-stamped files, not in my bruised memory. I bought a notebook and a cheap voice recorder. I created folders on my laptop, dates, messages, finances, witnesses. I made copies of her emails whenever she left the laptop open. I screenshotted texts and hid the images in a folder with an innocuous name. I kept bank statements, bills, receipts. I printed contracts. I logged times when she came home late. I wrote down conversations verbatim, even the small, wounding lies. "You're obsessive," she told me once, glancing at the notebook when I left it on the table. She laughed it off. "You should focus on moving on." So I did. When she fell asleep, I copied messages from her work account and archived them. When she threw a receipt in the bin, I fished it out, not to spy, but because the smallest thing can link a story. A receipt from a late-night bar. A confirmation for dinner for two at an expensive place she'd never mentioned to me. Small stitches that, when woven together, made a pattern I was finally willing to see. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I told a lie to everyone, that I was still shattered. Daniel asked me to come out. "You need to live, man," he said. I agreed and met him for beers twice, always leaving earlier than I used to. I let people assume I was fragile. It gave me cover. Meanwhile, I did practical things. I met with a lawyer, not to start a fight, but to understand my options. The lawyer was professional and blunt. "Document everything," he said. "Keep it separate. Don't mix emotion with legal steps." He spoke in terms I hadn't been forced to speak before: assets, liabilities, joint accounts, property titles. The words were clinical and cold. They steadied me. I opened a personal account in my name only. I moved savings there, small amounts at first, always careful not to trigger bank alerts or draw attention. I changed passwords on accounts I controlled. I made sure our shared investments were traced, understood, and catalogued. I learned where we held what. I learned where she had access and where she didn't. She watched me do it with a puzzled smile. "You're different lately," she said one Sunday over coffee, as if that comment were an admission and not a question. Her voice had that old edge of condescension I'd heard earlier, pity wrapped as observation. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe I am." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Different how? I set my mug down carefully. Less frantic. More practical. I let the words sit between us. Her response was a laugh. Good for you. She kept underestimating the quiet. Underestimation is a weapon in itself. People misuse it all the time. It gives space. It baits them into mistakes. I began to rebuild the rest of my life in parallel. If revenge required patience, it also required a living, breathing person who could survive the plans they made. I went back to the gym. I took classes, small ones at first, public speaking, a night course in something I'd always wanted to try. I applied for a job that paid more and required me to be less available at home. I said yes to projects I would have said no to before. That part felt like a resurrection. I sharpened my body and my mind not because I wanted her to notice, but because I wanted to be steady. It's astonishing how much power steadiness gives you. A steady man isn't easy to bait. She did notice. You're working too much, she complained one evening. Ever since you decided we were over, you've been everywhere. There was venom in the sentence. She was trying to make me look like the one running away. I smiled and opened the mail. Paperwork, I said. She rolled her eyes and walked past. Her indifference became her arrogance. She began to brag, casually, about her schedule, about meetings that ran late, about dinners she could never describe in detail, about how exhausted she was. Every boast was a breadcrumb. I collected them. There were setbacks. A close friend, someone I'd trusted for years, warned me when he started to see the pattern in my actions. Be careful, he said in a low voice when we were alone. This isn't you. Don't stoop to looking like a villain. I appreciated his concern. I answered him honestly. I don't want to be a villain, I said. I just want the truth. He frowned. Just make sure the truth is what you get. Not revenge for revenge's sake. His words lodged in my chest like a splinter. For a night, doubt crept in. Was I becoming like them? Was I letting myself turn into someone who used pain as a tool instead of a teacher? Then I remembered the way she'd said divorced the second time, bored, sure, already moving on. I remembered the empty ring of her laughter. I remembered the countless mornings I'd held her and been turned aside in her mind. That memory pushed me forward. If revenge was the only thing that would open her eyes and stop her from smiling with someone else while she wore my history like an unpaid debt, then I would make it surgical, clean, and precise. Psychological warfare isn't dramatic in the movies. It's quiet. It's relentless. It's the accumulation of truth where she thought she had narrative control. So I continued to be kind. I cooked meals she used to like. I left notes in her shoes that said, in a perfectly ordinary way, have a good day. I smiled in the grocery store. I washed her shirt when she left it on the chair. My politeness became a mask that wrapped around the real engine of what I was doing. It made her complacent. When she mocked my persistence, I laughed with her. When she called me paranoid, I nodded. When she raised her voice, I took deep breaths and said, okay. It unnerved her. She had always been used to dramatic reactions. Calm had a corrosive effect on her confidence. All the while, I added to the files. Emails. Screenshots. A voicemail where she mentioned us in a tone that implied something deeper than friendship. A string of messages where she blamed me for things she'd done. Dates. Times. Witness statements, snippets from coworkers who casually mentioned seeing her with someone at a restaurant or staying late with a particular friend. I wasn't breaking any laws, I was simply archiving facts she had carefully kept in the dark. There were practical moves too. I scheduled consultations with a financial advisor under the pretense of getting my affairs in order. I learned how joint assets were titled and what could be protected. I arranged for small transfers, the legal kind, the kind that would make a difference on paper. When I signed forms, I read every line. I understood what would happen if a divorce went public. I learned leverage. She asked me one night, "Why are you doing all this paperwork?" Her brow creased with suspicion. I shrugged. "Just getting my stuff organized. If we're going to do this, better be prepared, right?" "That's such you," she said with a sour smile. "Always practical." She thought it was bitter. She didn't know the steady calculation. She didn't know I was building the scaffolding for something final and public, something to strip her of the illusion she'd wrapped herself in. Then came the letter. I wrote it longhand, because some truths are cleaner when you put them to paper in your own hand. It began with neutral things, dates, references, reminders of where we began. I described moments she'd loved. I recalled the night of the power outage and how she'd said I made her feel safe. I put those memories there deliberately, a mirror in which she couldn't help but see what she had shredded. I didn't make it long. I didn't need to. The art of the devastating sentence is also the art of restraint. I drafted the words, erased them, rewrote them at 2 a.m., and finally sat with a single line that felt like a scalpel. I couldn't say it aloud. Saying it would cheapen it. I had to place it where it would cut cleanly and unexpectedly. "You taught me how to lose you, perfectly." I wrote it, folded the letter, and put it in an envelope. I didn't send it. Not yet. Timing mattered. Paint a tragedy too early and no one notices. Let it unfold and the truth gets attention. When a plan involves people, it will always wobble. Mine was no different. The biggest setback came when she noticed I'd been taking notes. She found the notebook one afternoon after I left it on the counter. She rifled through it with flippant fingers, scowled at a few pages, and then laughed, a brittle, searching sound. "You kept a diary," she mocked. "How romantic. Or pathetic. Can't tell which." For a terrifying second I thought she would burn it, shred it, destroy the archive I'd worked so hard to keep. Instead, she tossed it back at me. "You should see someone, seriously." That was the moment I learned the depths of her arrogance. She believed destroying the obvious would destroy the evidence. She didn't realize I had backups, copies tucked away on external drives, emails forwarded to accounts she could never access. I had been careful. I had prepared for dumb notions like that. My friend's warning echoed in my head again. "Make sure the truth is what you get." I wrote it on the first page of the notebook. I let it remind me every time doubt crept in. And then I waited. Not passively. Not in a slump of despair. I continued to rebuild, to move, to show the world an ordinary man coping and stable. The more ordinary I seemed, the more she relaxed. She began to throw our history away like lint. She spoke about the divorce matter-of-factly in front of friends. She laughed about the drama with coworkers. She planned a new life with startling casualness. I documented the plans. I collected invitations where she listed +1. I saved the photos she posted where she looked incandescent with someone else's company. I saved conservative copies for court, proof that she was not only removing herself emotionally but acting on it publicly. The blueprint of my revenge was simple: reveal the truth at the time and in the place that would matter most to her. Make the world she'd been parading through the same world that would now hold her accountable. Hit her where she was most fragile: reputation, pride, control. In the quiet hours, I rehearsed the moment I would deliver the letter and the files. I practiced the line. I whispered it until it was not mine but a bell of inevitability. One thing I refused to become was a liar. Everything I prepared was true. I curated it, organized it, and chose the timing. That was the difference between cruelty and consequence. When I finally sealed the envelope, I felt the cold steadiness of someone who had turned pain into preparation and preparation into power. I slid the letter into my jacket and walked out of the house that afternoon, smiling like a man who had finally remembered how to breathe. She watched me go from the doorway, puzzled, probably relieved to see me stepping outward rather than collapsing inward. She thought I was moving on. She didn't know I was moving forward, with everything she ever took for granted kept safe in a file labeled, "For when she needs the truth." The conference room smelled of lemon cleaner and cheap coffee. Sunlight came in through blinds, cutting the table into stripes. She sat at the far end, legs crossed, nails tapping the folder she'd brought as if she owned the room. Her expression was carefully indifferent, the same armor she'd used the last time she said the word divorce. She expected the performance, my collapse, my negotiation, my begging. There was a mediator at the table, neutral, formal, a woman with wire-frame glasses who'd been hired to keep things civil. My lawyer sat beside me, papers organized in a neat stack. He nodded at me once, as if to say, "Everything's ready." I kept my hands folded, my face blank. Calm felt like a power I'd only just reclaimed. She started with the usual litany, the practiced lines she'd given friends, how we'd grown apart, how she tried, how staying felt impossible. Her voice was tight, efficient. She glanced at me half expectantly, hunting for the familiar script. I saw, for an instant, the old impatience, the way she wanted me to beg so she could dismiss me as weak. I didn't. When the mediator asked if I had anything to add, I reached into my jacket and placed an envelope on the table. It seemed too small to contain the weight of what it did. She frowned. "What's that?" she asked, already annoyed. My lawyer leaned forward, casually. "A packet of documentation." She laughed, short and incredulous. "You're serious? You brought paperwork?" Her eyes flicked to the mediator. "He's making this difficult." I slid the envelope toward her. The motion was deliberate, slow. She picked it up, thumbed the flap, and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots on crisp paper, time-stamped emails, forwarded messages, copied texts. There were bank confirmations for dinners and hotels, receipts with times, calendar entries with names she'd never used in front of me. There were anonymous witness notes, co-workers who had seen her late at a restaurant with someone listed as Ethan. There were copies of the messages she had shared with him, confessions disguised as complaints, intimate jokes she never made to me anymore, fragments of herself she'd given away. She read one line, then another. Her face shifted, confusion first, then irritation, then the white-hot flush of anger. She flipped through faster, fingers trembling. I felt a cold clarity settle over me, the way the night settles after a storm. "Where did you get these?" she asked. Her voice was too loud, all eyes turning to her. My lawyer answered, even-tempered. "Collected legally, sir. Forwarded messages, public posts, receipts corroborated by witness statements. It's all here, ma'am. We can go through it item by item if you prefer." She looked at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "This is fabricated," she said to the mediator, then to me. "You planted this." "No," I said, and the word landed like a small stone. "I documented the truth." She scoffed, but the scoff was paper-thin. She reached for her phone with a hand that didn't quite steady. She made several frantic calls that went straight to voicemail. Her smugness, the casual cruelty she'd worn like perfume, began to unravel. The mediator asked for a moment to herself, eyes sliding between us like a referee. I watched her crumble in slow motion, tiny, sharp cracks spreading across the surface of her composure. She pressed her palms to her temples, and tried to force air into her lungs. She looked at me not with pity anymore, not with contempt, but with raw, bewildered fear. The world she'd been performing in, the one where she could casually destroy what she'd bound in vows and then walk away unmarked, began to blink and go dark. Then I did the thing I had rehearsed in my head 100 times in the quiet. No speech, no accusations. Just one line. I leaned forward, met her eyes, and said softly, "You taught me how to lose you, perfectly." The words were quiet, ordinary, almost tender. They floated across the table. For a beat, nothing happened. Then the sound of her breath caught, the color drained from her face like paint washed away. She looked as if someone had turned on a light and the scenery revealed itself as a stage set. "You what?" she whispered, like a child who'd been told an impossible fact. "You taught me how to lose you," I repeated, not louder, just with a measured clarity. "Every time you walked away, every time you invented my paranoia, you rehearsed an exit strategy. You taught me the script. I learned it. I perfected it. And now I've shown it to the room." Her hands shook. She shoved the papers back at me, but they slid across the laminate and landed in a neat fan that revealed more than she wanted. She stood up, sudden and sharp, eyes burning. "This is a setup," she accused, venom returning as a reflex. My lawyer kept his voice low. "Ms. Anders, we can go through specifics. This packet shows patterns: emotional disengagement, contact outside the marriage, actions consistent with establishing a separate life." Outside the window, a delivery truck idled for a moment, a dog barked in the distance, the mediator's pen scratched. Inside the room, her breathing was a misfiring engine. She made a call that I'd anticipated. Her boss. Her voice, once a soft dismissal, was now brittle with panic. I had copies of several public posts sent to her manager earlier that morning, the photos from the restaurant where she'd been laughing at a table with Ethan, the tagged captions suggesting intimacy. I'd delivered them to her manager's desk before walking into this room. I'd also forwarded a carefully composed message to Ethan's wife. Yes, there was a wife, because truth, when held in private, is a kindness to others who don't yet know. The string of messages lit the mediator's phone. The boss's voice framed it as a professional problem. A complaint might follow. HR would get involved. The punctuation of her life, promotions, projects, suddenly looked precarious beside the evidence of emotional abandonment. She sank into the chair like a puppeteer who'd just seen her strings cut. Her mouth opened and closed around words that wouldn't form. I kept my voice soft. "I didn't come to destroy you," I told her. "I came to stop the lie. The world you've been carving out without me, the life of effortless exits and rehearsed traumata, I exposed it so you couldn't pretend it was still private." She started to cry then. It wasn't the dramatic sob I'd expected to hear when she first said divorce. It was the raw, ragged kind, the sound of someone aware of the collapse and powerless to stop it. She pressed her face into her hands and let the sounds leak. Around us, the seam of her world split. Her colleagues would see messages and wonder. Her friends would hear a different version of her and ask disquieting questions. Ethan would be faced with a confrontation no one rehearsed for. Her carefully curated image, the one she paraded at brunches and board meetings, began to tear. People are most vulnerable when they realize their narrative no longer works. She had always relied on narrative control, rewriting the past, reframing the present. Today, she could no longer do that. The facts sat between us like a slab of glass. She looked up, eyes wild, and for the first time I saw the thing I hadn't seen in a long time: genuine fear. "You can't do this," she said, voice a thread. "You can't." I cut her off gently. "I already did." She reached for words that would wound me back to my knees, but I felt nothing that could be used. I felt the odd steadiness of a man who'd rehearsed losing and found something else instead, a purpose not rooted in her recognition. She had taught me how to lose, and I'd used that lesson to pry the curtain from the stage. When we left the room, people paused in the hallway and looked at her with the sort of curiosity that became a rumor. She walked ahead, shoulders hunched, face turned slightly away as if to hide from the inevitable gossip that would follow. Her phone buzzed 100 times in her handbag. She didn't answer. Weeks later, the fallout would be messier than either of us anticipated: HR investigations, whispered questions in the elevator, social media threads that rerouted her image. I didn't orchestrate every consequence. I only opened the door and stepped back. The world did the rest. That afternoon, as we stepped into the blinding sunlight and the ordinary noises of the city swallowed our private collapse, she looked at me once more, searching, pleading, resentful. Her mouth worked, but no plaintive begging came, just a hollow, stunned silence. "You thought I'd beg," I said, softer than the last fall of a curtain. "You thought I'd lose myself so you could feel justified." She stared at me, the last shred of her composure strangled in her throat. I smiled, not angry, not triumphant, just clear. "You taught me how to lose you, perfectly." Her knees buckled, and she would later say the moment everything started to go wrong for her was the moment I stopped begging. The house is quieter now. Not empty, just quieter. The kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. It's been 3 months since the meeting. The papers were signed, the signatures dry, the story closed in legal ink. There were no grand apologies afterward, no last-minute scenes. Just a few perfunctory texts: "We need to talk. You went too far. You ruined everything." I never answered. She called for a while, late nights, sometimes back-to-back calls that lit my phone until the battery died. The first few times, I let it ring. After that, I changed my number. Freedom is a strange thing. For years, I thought it meant keeping something together no matter what it cost. Now I realize it's what happens when you stop holding onto something that's already ash. The world moved on, as it always does. I started waking up early again, real mornings, without the dread of pretending. I'd make coffee, open the windows, let the cold air sting a little. That sting felt like proof I was still here. I found a small apartment near the water. It's nothing extravagant, just a clean space with no ghosts hiding in the corners. I keep it simple: a desk, a bed, a stack of books, and the notebook that started it all. I don't write in it anymore. I keep it as a reminder of what silence can build if you give it enough time. People who know us still ask sometimes. They phrase it carefully, as if walking barefoot through glass. "What really happened between you two?" I just smile and say, "We both got what we wanted." She, apparently, moved out of the city not long after. Someone told me her job didn't last, that she'd burned bridges she couldn't rebuild. I don't know if it's true. I don't check. The version of her that exists now isn't mine to remember. I'm not proud. Not regretful either. Just, still. Some nights I think back to how calm it all felt at the end, the way she looked across that table, the way her voice cracked when she realized I wasn't there to fight. I used to imagine revenge as fire, something that burned hot and left you hollow. But this was different. It wasn't a fire. It was frost, slow, patient, absolute. I learned something in the wreckage: love and revenge are made from the same material: time, attention, memory. The difference is what you build with them. When people talk about closure, they imagine some perfect moment when the heart feels healed. Mine didn't heal that way. It didn't need to. It just went quiet, like a wound that no longer bleeds but still aches in the rain. The last message she ever sent came at 2:14 a.m. It said, "You win. Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted it without replying. Because the truth was, I didn't win. There was never a game. There was just truth, finally standing on its own feet. I walked out onto my balcony, the city lights flickering below, and I realized something strange: I didn't need her to break anymore. She already had. The lies she'd built, the stories she'd spun, they'd all collapsed under their own weight. I didn't have to push. I exhaled, slow and steady. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to breathe. Maybe that's the real revenge: not destruction, but indifference. Not fire, but the cold peace that follows it. She wanted freedom. I gave it to her, right before I took away everything else.